I'm just going to be moving on to introducing Mara, and I'm quite excited to see what background Mara is going to have for us today in Kenya. So welcome, Mara.
Hello. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay.
I can. Ooh. Okay, so you've had your hair done, so there's some changes.
A few changes, yes, but I'm still in nature. So this beautiful coconut thatch, or in Kenya we call it a makuti roof. So I'm still in Kenya, trapped here actually just now. I can't actually get out, which isn't too bad, I don't think. But I've got this beautiful tree behind me. I've got a lot of nature around me, which I'm quite happy about. So yes, and it's warm. Yes, but yeah, really lovely to hear all the conversations that have been happening this morning. And yeah, and just sort of seeing how they fitted in with, you know, the previous conversations that we've had over the last couple of sessions as well. So yeah, I'm excited about the story. I hope you are too.
It does feel like we're on a journey. I don't know if you would agree with that, but yeah, it'd be lovely to get your feedback as well at the end about how this journey for you. Okay, so I'm going to just go through your bio. So I'm just going to introduce you. Sure. So for anyone who hasn't attended our past two events, Mara is an award-winning performance storyteller and narrative artist who draws on her rich dual Kenyan Scottish cultural heritage to create worlds that explore contemporary issues through legend, myth, and fantasy. She fuses ancient and modern in an intoxicating experience where the audience takes center stage, leading to invitations to perform all around the world. Mara has been everywhere: Jamaica, America, I mean, you can really name it. Mara's Fringe Festival show, Blood and Gold, performed at the Storytelling Centre, received rave reviews, and hopefully when live storytelling resumes, we'll all be able to go and see her live and direct. So everyone, if you could please remember that you can put any questions, comments, reflections into the chat function. And then we'll move to that after Mara's done her story. So thank you very much, and I'll let you take it away, Mara. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, there's a monkey behind me right now. There's my little excitement. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a monkey on the tree. So
I'm sure earlier I saw a tail, but I thought maybe I was imagining it. So
no, there's definitely a monkey. So I've just got a little bit excited there.
Well, lucky you.
Yes, who knows? It might pop up again. But yes, I suppose you're ready for the story now. And I was really interested actually in this story because I was doing quite a lot of reading as to what a lot of activists are doing, particularly also with the keynote speakers that we've had and what they have also been experiencing. So it's really nice to be able to take a lot of different issues and put them together in this new story. And this new story is a story about a girl, and she was a girl from two worlds. And the first world that she came from was the world in which she was born. She came from a land that was hot, filled with bright sunshine, blue skies. She lived in a little village high up in the hills. And in the rainy season, the little seasonal river filled up high, and she would leap into it with her friends. She would help her parents around the farm, and she lived a simple life and a fairly carefree life. And when the girl was of a certain age, her parents summoned her forward and they said, "Daughter, this life is not for you. You have been given the opportunity to leave this place and to go to the other side of the world and live with your aunt. And there you will have every opportunity possible given to you. And so you are going to go." Now the parents knew or felt that this was the best thing for their daughter to do. However, they did not once consult her because that is not how things were done. And so even though the girl was curious and excited, she was also filled with a great wave of fear because she had never left her village before. But she could not speak about those feelings. So instead, she kept them deep inside her because that is how things were normally done. A few months later, she found herself at the airport, welcomed by her aunt, this wonderful, joyous woman who was delighted that her niece would come and be with her and she would be able to share a new life. And into this new world, the young girl came. It was such a new world, castles on ancient volcanoes, cobblestones, great stone buildings, tiny little alleyways and closes. And they say that the entire city was filled with ghosts. And this was the second world that the girl belonged to. And she very quickly became used to this new life. She found out that as soon as she turned the tap, the freshest of water would flow out. She knew that whenever she flicked the switch, the room would be filled with light. She enjoyed this place and she began to love this new place. And sometimes she was filled with the feeling of homesickness. She missed her family. She missed her friends. She even missed her pet cow. But all of these feelings, she knew that she could never really share them with her aunt, because that is not how things were done. And so instead, she kept them deep inside herself and she stored them there. After a few years had passed, her aunt decided that it was time for her to go home and see her family. Now, the young girl had grown and she was excited at seeing her mother and her father again. And so when they arrived, there was a great feast, a huge celebration. Everybody was ululating, dancing. They grabbed her, they threw her up in the air, they caught her. They had a wonderful, welcoming home. And of course, after the celebrations had taken place and she had settled back into life in the village, she was, of course, expected to carry on with the responsibilities that she had once had. But the girl realized that she had forgotten the weight of these responsibilities. She was tired of having to carry heavy liters of water on her head from the water hole. She was tired of having to go out into the fields and hack down the firewood and carry great bundles back to the house with her mother, who she noticed had begun to stoop lower and lower. And she realized as she looked around that the trees that had once filled this forest, filled this valley, filled this village, well, they were far fewer. And even the water of the river felt much shallower than it had once been. The girl began to miss the luxuries of her new world, and she began to miss her new home. And so after a few weeks, when her aunt decided it was time for them to go back, she was happy. She missed her parents and she missed her siblings and her friends, but she said goodbye and she returned to her new world. And when she was there, she immediately fell back into life. She was back at school and her teachers asked how her trip had been, and she told them everything, how wonderful it was to be back in the village, because she knew that if she told them how difficult it was, it might bring shame on her family. And that is not how things should be done. A few months later, the teacher announced that there was going to be a project-based learning. So all the children in the class were expected to find a subject of interest, and then they were to research that subject that would make the world a better place, and they would do a great presentation to everybody else in the class. Oh, the excitement. There were so many things that they could talk about. They could choose anything that was of interest to them. And the girl thought, what can I talk about? How could I make the world a better place? What problem should I focus on? And she began to think of how her mother had stooped as she carried the great bundles of firewood on her head. And she realized that one great problem in the village was that all the trees were being cut down. So she decided deforestation is the perfect project for her. She started to carry out her research, and she soon realized that the problem was much, much bigger than she had anticipated. It didn't just affect her little village. It affected entire countries around the entire world. It made the sands of the Sahara begin to encroach on the southern countries. She realized how it was a problem in every single continent. Trees just being hacked down, jungles destroyed every single day. And all of these feelings began to overwhelm her. And she stored them inside because that was the only thing that she knew to do. She prepared her presentation. And on the day that it was due to be delivered, she sat there with all the other students in her class, and she listened to all the other projects that had been prepared. And the more she listened, the more filled with shame and despair and frustration and anger, because she realized how many problems existed. She saw images of the orangutans being burnt because of the palm oil problems in Borneo. She realized the scale of the waste of landfills that were piled, the waste that was sent from developed countries all the way to developing countries who had no idea of how to deal with this problem. She saw the plastic floating in rivers across the world, in great oceans, huge football fields of plastic waste. And these feelings began to overwhelm her, and she didn't know what to do with them other than store them deep inside her. When she got home, she asked her aunt, "Aunt, we have so many problems. Perhaps we could start to do things here in the house. I mean, we always buy fruit that is wrapped in plastic. Maybe we could start going to the Whole Food shops or down to the local market." And her aunt stopped her in her tracks and said, "Do you know how expensive the fruit and vegetables in the markets can be? Do you know how expensive these specialist shops are? No. Unless you are providing income into this family, I am going to keep shopping where I shop." And the girl, she couldn't respond. And so she did as she had always done, and she kept her feelings inside. She asked her aunt, "Auntie, we have a car, but surely all the bus systems work. Why don't you use public transport?" "Hey," the aunt said, "do you know how many people I support back home? I need to have at least 2 jobs. I finish one, I have to go to the other one. Do you know how much time it would take if all I did was jump on bus and train? Do you know the expense that comes with that?" "No, daughter, I am sorry. We have to keep the car." And the girl, no matter what problem she tried to solve at home, she began to feel a great sense of hopelessness. She didn't feel useful in any way, shape, or form. And all of these feelings that she had gathered and stored over the many years of her life were now building up inside. And she didn't know what to do with them. She didn't know how to release them. She didn't know how to share them. And so they started to manifest themselves in different ways. She began to unleash them violently without warning. And her aunt was shocked. "Hey, how can you behave in such a way? Hey, how could you do such a thing? Hey, daughter, please, you need to control yourself." And it all came to a great standstill the day that she reacted with such force towards her aunt. Her aunt said, "Daughter, this has got to stop. Look at your behavior." And the girl thought, and she realized that yes, she had so much anger stored up inside and it was misplaced. She needed to do something, so out she went. She went out into the fresh air and she began to walk, trying to let her feelings wash over her. She happened to pass by a square. And in that square, there was a stage. And on that stage, there was a speaker. And she stopped to listen to that speaker. A lot of the words went over her head, but there was something at the message, at the core of the message that was being spoken, that resonated with all the feelings that she felt. She listened and she became drawn to all the audience, the people that were gathered around the speaker. And she thought, yes, all of these people want to make the world a better place. If I were to join this group, then I would become part of this movement and I could channel my energies into something that is really going to make a difference. And so she did. She dived right in. She became involved with the organizing of events. She designed posters. She distributed flyers. She attended demonstrations. Oh, she was filled with this great lightness of spirit. Finally, she was able to do something. And so she carried on hours and hours a day. Her weekends were filled with different activities where she would fight to save this and fight to save that and fight to prevent this and challenge the government here and challenge her school there. And she noticed that whenever a school strike was planned, they would accept quite easily. And yet, when they were demonstrating against the fracking, they were dealt with in a different manner because this would disrupt business and that had to be approached very differently. All of these activities that she channeled her energy into took up so much time. The weeks rolled into months and the months rolled into years, and still she tried, and still she insisted, and still she tried to gather more people to join the group and help, because she knew that when all their voices were heard, then change would surely come. But after a few years, all this exhilaration, this wave of hopefulness, it began to take its toll because she realized that change was not coming as swiftly as she wanted it to come. She tried so hard every single day, and yet the feelings were so overwhelming that they forced themselves on her, and she became ill. She became tired. She became lonely and desperate, and she tried to speak to the others in the group, and still she found herself floundering. And she thought to herself, what am I going to do? I need time out. And so she did. She stepped back from the group, and she began to listen to all the thoughts that were swirling around her head. She began to consider all the problems that had been forced her way. She began to think about all the conversations that had taken place within the group. She began to think, who is really at blame? Is it the people who have many children? Not necessarily, because she knew that in the village of her first world, they needed many children in order to till the land. She began to think about the blame pointed at those who kept herds of cattle. And she thought, but surely these people have kept cattle for hundreds, thousands of years. It is the systems that have changed and how people are able to manage those herds of cattle. And so she realized that she did not agree with everything, all the conversations that were taking place in the groups. And this again filled her with anxiety. But as she began to think about it and think about the processes and think about the people that she surrounded herself with, she knew that she could not take on every single problem in the world in the same way that she had been doing for such a long time. She remembered the words that her mother had spoken to her so long ago. Daughter, you have to start where you are. Use what you have and do what you can. And as those words began to resound around in her head, she realized there were so many issues going on. It wasn't just about the world. She had to think about who her aunt was helping to support. She had to think about the police brutality that she had experienced across social media that was filling her world. She had to think about the bullying that was taking place in school. She had to think about the racism that she was facing. She had to think about all the problems about who people were forced not to love. She thought about all of these things, and she decided she could only do what she could do. And the minute she made that decision, she began to think differently. She began to hope differently. She began to hope well.